Bueno, muy buenos días a los que se están sumando en este momento. Los saluda Horacio Matarazzo, presidente del comité, y voy a dar lugar a esta segunda charla de nuestro cronograma de 12 horas de transmisión. Cada charla va quedando grabada, la vamos a subir a YouTube y además queda acá en Facebook en forma fija y ya permanente. Bueno, esta segunda charla en inglés va a estar a cargo de Alex Fletcher. Alex es un joven y fanático observador de aves, también biólogo formado en Inglaterra. Él es inglés, es un poquito inglés, un poquito sueco, y después de vivir un tiempo en Australia, él se radicó en África para formarse como guía de observadores de aves, guía de naturaleza en general, pero bueno, ha sido cazado con Z por una argentina que se lo trajo a Argentina, y actualmente está desde hace un tiempo trabajando como biólogo y como guía de observadores de aves aquí en Argentina. Es parte del equipo de Buenos Días Birding, y hoy va a dar al mundo una charla en inglés presentando a Argentina. Igual habla castellano, así que le pueden hacer la pregunta en el idioma que quieran, el que quieran, castellano, inglés, sueco, francés, chino, lo que quieran, le pueden preguntar que él entiende. Y bueno, Alex, bienvenido, y podés ya compartir tu presentación, no la estás compartiendo ahora. Esto siempre, la feria, todas nuestras ferias tienen un poquito de informalidad, así que bien, ahí está. Bueno,
ahora sí.
Quedamos en tus manos. Adelante, Alex.
Bueno, gracias, Horacio. Muy buenos días a todos y a todas. Bueno, es un placer estar aquí en mi primer feria de aves. Y bueno, mucho gusto de conocerlos a todos. Y bueno, les pido disculpas porque sí, hoy voy a estar speaking English. So hopefully it's a good practice for those of you who maybe are learning English or who know a little bit. And for those who don't, well, you can enjoy the photos. There will always be photos, and I'll try to keep everything as clear as possible. That being said, I am going to try and talk about the whole of Argentina in, well, I have about 50 minutes. So we're gonna try and rush through it and get everything done, and hopefully you're going to learn something. And really, we're going to look at Argentina, not just in terms of its birds and of its birding sites, birding hotspots, as you can call them. But we're going to be looking a little bit at the geography of Argentina, and we're going to try and understand why there are birds in certain parts of the country. And we're going to look at it in terms of as if perhaps you were a tour operator or you were planning a visit to Argentina and you were working on an itinerary. So hopefully this presentation is going to make some of that more simple for you, because it's going to explain where you have to go to find certain birds and certain landscapes. So thank you, Horacio, for introducing me. I'm not going to waste any time talking about myself. So sit back, relax, enjoy the presentation. We're going to start with basics. In case you don't know where Argentina is, it is right here in the middle of the blue circle. It's this big country down south, second largest country in South America, and one of the largest in the world. In terms of population, we've got 45 million people living in Argentina, which places it 31st in on the global ranking. So it has basically means it has the 31st highest population. But in terms of surface area, 2.78 million kilometers squared, which makes it the 8th largest country in the world. The most interesting statistic here is the population density. As you can see from this map, large proportions of the country are white. And white, if you can see the key in the top right-hand corner, white means that there are basically no people living in these areas. So the population density of the country as a whole is 16 inhabitants per kilometer squared, which ranks it 173rd in the world. So what you're essentially looking at is a big country with not that many people in it related to its size. So that was a little bit on the human geography of Argentina. So we now have an idea that it's a big country and there's not a huge amount of people. So now we can look a little more at the physical geography. And you don't worry too much about the key in the bottom right-hand corner of this image here, because we're going to look at it in more detail during the presentation. But you can start to look at how many colors there are on the map, because each of these colors represents a different ecoregion. So an ecoregion is a level of organization, ecologically speaking, and it's something, in terms of definition, it's something a bit broader than a habitat and a bit more refined than a biome. It's essentially a geographical area with distinct communities and populations, according to the geology of the area and the soil type and the botany. So what you're essentially looking at is different groups of wildlife and vegetation that occur in each of these different colored ecoregions on the map. So there are 15 generally accepted in Argentina these days. So we can deduce from this that high geographical diversity equals high biodiversity. And South America is fortunate to have, well, every country in South America has got phenomenal geographical diversity, which makes it such a popular continent for birders, bird watchers, and bird tourists alike. And so while Argentina can't quite compete with some of the, well, with Peru, for example, or Colombia, or some of those other northern South American countries, according to the latest stats on Ibera, Argentina can still boast over 1,000 species that have been recorded within the country. Now, we accept that some of these are vagrants and rarities and introductions, both accidental and purposeful. But 1,000 species is nothing to be sniffed at. It's a hell of a lot more than where I'm from. England can't boast anywhere near as many species as this. So, well, I mean, basically Argentina, yeah, a very rich avian diversity, and it's all down to the high variation of its ecoregions, of which we're going to look at in more detail now. So what I've done here is I've highlighted 4 areas that cover, well, between them, they cover all 15 of the ecoregions. And I've tried to place them so that you're covering the largest amount of ecoregions possible in a relatively small surface area. Because realistically, unless you are loaded, unless you have a lot of money, you're not going to be able to cover the whole country realistically in one trip, which is the one downside of living in a large country. The benefit, of course, is that you get to come back and do it all again. So I've put 4 circles down on this map, and the idea is to focus our attention on each circle in turn, and we have a look at the ecoregions that are found within what we could call each itinerary. So we're going to start off here in the northeast. And within this first circle, we have 8 ecoregions. Don't worry, don't read them all right now, because I'm going to cover each one individually. Hopefully I'm not going to run over time. I know I've only got an hour, so we're going to jump straight into this. I'm going to start here. The Atlantic forest, it may not ring many bells to some of you, but hopefully the image does, because this is one of Argentina's most recognizable natural features, and it is indeed one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. These are, of course, the Iguazu Falls, which are found when they're found along the Iguazu River, and they serve as a natural border between 3 countries, between Argentina, between Brazil, and also with Paraguay. So when we're looking at the Atlantic forest within Argentina, we're looking at this relatively small, I hope you can see it on your screens. We're looking at this relatively small light blue area here in the province of Misiones. So this is where it's essentially a landlocked peninsula that juts up into, well, this white area here is occupied by Paraguay, and to the north Brazil. So this little stretch of Argentina is the only part of the country that forms the Atlantic forest ecoregion, for which the majority is found in Brazil, found in southeastern Brazil. It extends up as far, I believe, as the cities of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And in Argentina, it occupies just this very small part of the province of Misiones. So we're looking at some birds already. You can see them in the image here, flying in front of the waterfalls. I'm sure if you've visited the Iguazu Falls, you know what these are, but for the benefit of those that don't, they are great dusky swifts, and they are pretty much a guarantee when you visit the Iguazu National Park, because you can access walking trails and boardwalks that take you alongside or even right over the waterfalls. And these swifts are regularly seen flying not just over the falls, but also straight through them as well. Because as this photo suggests, they roost and they also nest behind the safety of the falling water. They're quite remarkable little birds, and they're pretty much a guarantee for anyone who takes a visit to the Iguazu National Park. Speaking of the national park, up here in the top right-hand corner, what I'm going to do for each ecoregion is highlight just a few sites, mostly protected areas, but sometimes other sites of interest that you may want to target on your trip. But of course, you aren't limited to protected areas and national parks and what have you. Here, for example, this image shows just a typical dirt road somewhere deep in the province of Misiones, deep in the Atlantic forest, where you can very easily trundle along in your vehicle, not meet another car all day, get out every 100 meters or so and go and have a look around and see what's going on. Up here, I've got written down as well, hummingbird gardens. Now, these are fairly popular up in the Iguazu area in the Atlantic forest because, well, there are plenty of species of hummingbirds. There are well over a dozen that you might expect to see if you go for a visit in one of these specially set up gardens. So here's an image of one. This is a Planalto hermit. I'm just going to point out the names are in English because I'm aware that the common names for the species, well, in Argentina at least, can be different to those in other parts of South America. So the names are in English for the time being. I hope you can bear with me on that. So the Planalto hermit is just one of at least a dozen species that you might expect to see on a trip to a typical hummingbird garden. You can see here in the photo an artificial bird feeder. In terms of, well, in more wild habitats, I mean, we have, there are plenty of species to keep the most serious or the most kind of tranquil of birders occupied. The green-headed tanager is a real favorite among visitors, well, both for visitors and guides. It's always a highlight, and you can expect to see lots of these colorful tanager and finch-like birds on a day in the Atlantic forest. As well as this, here you get some interesting species also, like this red-ruffed fruit crow. This is a species that is also found further north in South America. But this is the Scutatus subspecies, which is, this is endemic as a subspecies to the Atlantic forest of Argentina and Brazil. In total in the Atlantic forest, I mean, you can't expect, well, you'd be doing extremely well to see so many species in one day. But realistically, if you spent a good amount of time in the forest, or at least in this part of Argentina, you could look to tally up somewhere well in excess of 300 species, potentially even over 400. Certainly within a couple of days, you can expect to see well over 100, and depending on how seriously you take your day of birding, maybe even 200. But rest assured, there'll be plenty of species to be going around, and it's just up to you to go out and find them. So the Atlantic forest is an excellent place to start because it offers fairly easy access to a wide array of species. But as we know already, there are 14 other ecoregions, and it's only fair that we cover them all with equal enthusiasm. So what we're going to do now is we're going to head on south, and we're going to head to a slightly different ecoregion. We're now moving into strictly wetland habitats. We're leaving the forest behind, and we are going to the Ibera wetlands, which they're a mini Pantanal, if you haven't heard of Ibera. It's a site that is undoubtedly going to become better known as time goes on and as tourism infrastructure increases in the area. I'm quickly going to show you where it is. So hopefully you can see not only the image, but also my mouse, which is going to roughly direct you over here where it says Corrientes. So we're moving southwest from where we were in the Atlantic forest. And now this teal green area is the ecoregion of the Ibera wetlands. And yeah, as the name suggests, obviously it's a large wetland site, and it's incredibly important for the area. It's one of the largest landlocked inland wetland sites on the continent. There's a good deal, as you can tell here, of wetland species. So depending on the season, it will attract lots of, what have we got here? Wood storks, roseate spoonbills, great egrets, little egrets, white-faced ibis here as well. And now I guess the safety and security of these birds is now more or less guaranteed by the recent inauguration of the Ibera National Park, which has also been instrumental in a number of rewilding and reintroduction projects of not just bird species, but also of mammal species. So on your day in Ibera, you may, or you could also expect to see some of the large mammalian species that are typical of Argentina, namely the, well, if you're very lucky, a jaguar, but also giant anteaters, tapirs and peccaries. But we're going to focus on birds for the time being. So we've had some water birds in the background there. We're going to look at some passerines here because the Ibera wetlands are also home to some threatened grassland habitats and some that have a precarious status throughout much of Argentina. So it's a bit of a refuge to a lot of species that do not occur anywhere else in the country. So the white-headed marsh tyrant is a very nice wetland-associated New World flycatcher. Also here we have the black-capped Donacobius, where Ibera represents the best place in the country to see this bird. And speaking of grassland species, the strange-tailed tyrant is probably the emblematic species of the Ibera grasslands, the pastizal, and is a firm favorite both among visitors and guides. With those long tail streamers, I don't think anyone really gets bored of seeing a strange-tailed tyrant. In terms of total species diversity, you're looking at a little bit less than Ibera, than Iguazu and then of the Atlantic forest, because you aren't quite getting the same forested habitat, but again, over 350 species have been recorded, and you could tally up quite a nice number in a couple of days' work. Quick note on Ibera, because the national park is quite new, you could say it's fairly underdeveloped, but this, I imagine for a lot of you, would be advantageous when considering tourism, because you probably won't have to share the national park with too many other people. So my advice would be to get in quickly and pay it a visit before the rest of the world realizes how amazing it is and how much more accessible it is than the Pantanal, and everyone starts going to Ibera as well. So, yeah, a visit here, highly advisable. And moving on, we move to one of the most important natural landmarks of not just Argentina, but of southern South America as a whole. The Parana River is the second longest river in South America. It's about 7,000 kilometers from its source up in south central Brazil. As it flows down through Brazil, it straddles the border between Paraguay and Argentina, and then it flows south through Argentina before reaching the mouth of, it's not the Atlantic Ocean, it actually flows into the Rio de la Plata estuary, where in the form of a delta. And the delta is, well, this is the delta obviously pictured here. The delta is one of the fastest growing in the world, to the point where if you're familiar with the city of Buenos Aires and you look out over the river and you see, normally you see a lot of brown murky water and perhaps a little glimpse of Uruguay in the distance. Well, the belief is that within the next 50 to 100 years at the current rate of growth, that the Parana River Delta will actually start encroaching on the city. So those of you who are around in 50 to 100 years, you have that to look forward to. So the Parana River, again, as I explained, it's this green slither of ecoregion that flows here. Here it straddles the border between Argentina and Paraguay, as I mentioned, and it flows southwards here, and then forming a delta as it flows east and exits out into the estuary. And it's not just purely riverine species that you can expect to see here, because obviously with the delta and islands, you're going to get a variety of habitats. And in addition to that, you also get the floodplains. Most of the land bordering the Parana River is very lie-lowing. So you get these enormous, extensive wetland systems that are linked to the river. So the Ibera wetlands being one, obviously. So there's a couple of national parks mentioned up here in the top right-hand corner as well that are found right on the river. Here we've got some saffron-cowled blackbirds in the photo. These are, again, very important species, very emblematic species that are native to grassland regions of Argentina, also Paraguay and Brazil, and Uruguay. And some other species you might expect to see, some that you would more associate with tropical climates, but I guess the riverine habitats of the Parana are closely representative of the Atlantic forest in our example, to allow for species such as guans to not only occur but also to thrive. So the dusky-legged guan is a very common species in the lower delta, closer to the estuary, and occasionally found in the city of Buenos Aires as well. The red-billed scythebill is a species of wood creeper that is found further upriver. And then, as you might imagine, the riverine habitats are teeming with water birds and wetland-associated species. And the thick vegetation of the delta is home to numerous species of rails and crakes, which are typically hard to find as they are all over the world. The rufous-sided crake pictured here is one of the more common of the crakes in Argentina as a whole, I guess. But it's very difficult to see, and the unwitting birder may very well be stood right on top of one and not even realize it unless they call. So they're very secretive birds and require a bit of searching. And because of the range of habitats, not only the wetland species that will live more or less on the river, but also your floodplain grassland species. The Parana River, throughout its length in Argentina, you could accrue over time somewhere north of 300 to 350 species. So we're going to move on quickly look at a transitional ecoregion, the Mesopotamian savannah. I'm going to cover this one a little bit more quickly because, as you can see up here, in terms of protected areas, it has either none or very small protected areas that I'm not aware of. I apologize. And I'm going to quickly show where it occurs here on this previous image. So we're looking here between the Atlantic forest of Misiones and the Ibera wetlands that we've just looked at here. So we're looking up this light blue area here in the northeast. This is typical savanna habitat. And by savanna, we mean grasslands with very low tall vegetation cover. So sparse tree cover, basically. So it's good for grassland species, but ultimately we treat the Mesopotamian savanna more as, again, a transitional ecoregion that we essentially drive through in order to get to either the wetlands further south or the forest further north. But there are nice species here. So the burrowing owl is fairly common throughout much of Argentina. It's a largely terrestrial species that you will see on roadside fence posts throughout off highways throughout much of the country. It's a good spot for migrants as well. So a lot of migrant species will pass through here, including the fork-tailed flycatcher, which will have been arriving to Argentina. Well, they should have all arrived by now from further north in South America. and here they will spend the austral summer. And then also Argentina's own wild chicken. I guess the giant wood rail is very common in some parts of northern Argentina, very often seen at the roadside, and it often mingles for whatever reason with domestic poultry. So keep an eye out for them while you're driving on the northern highways, and try not to hit any, because these are also largely terrestrial and they have a tendency to not fly away when facing danger. They're also the world's largest rail, I believe, if you discount the Takahe from New Zealand. The giant wood rail is certainly the largest rail in the Americas. 250 species. Again, as I said, we're mostly passing through the savannah. We're looking out of the window to see if we can pick up any of these nice terrestrial species, but it's certainly worth keeping your eye out because of its vicinity to the wetlands to the south and the forest to the north. There are plenty of birds to see around here. But we're going to move on now to an altogether more intriguing ecoregion, one that will resonate with a lot of you, and one that should really be better known around the world. And I'm talking about the Chaco, but not just the wet Chaco pictured here, also the dry Chaco. And the difference, I mean, I've used photographs to highlight the difference. I mean, the wet Chaco doesn't all, it's not always wet. But I'm gonna show you now, well, geographically speaking, why one is dry and one is wet. Basically, the wet Chaco is this blue area here, and as we've seen on previous slides, it borders on to the Parana River ecoregion, and therefore is part of the same floodplain. It's all part of the Rio de la Plata basin, and for that reason, it's more habitually flooded than the dry Chaco, which is found further west, which is this large green area here, and is one of the largest ecoregions in the country. And yeah, they're typically defined, or they can be separated by the vegetation type. You see the wet Chaco here is more dominated by palm trees. And the dry Chaco, well, it's more forested. It's a drier forest. Here we have the Ceiba speciosa, the palo borracho trees. Also a lot of the Argentinian national tree, the ceibo, the Erythrina cristagalli, also occurs here. And what we've seen where the dry Chaco is, so we're going to move on. So we've had a little look at the difference. So the wet Chaco, because of its vicinity to the Parana River, it's often flooded, and therefore it attracts a lot of wetland species and some of the more emblematic species of the country. So the jabiru stork, for example, one of the tallest birds in South America as a whole. It stands about 1.5 meters tall. So quite imposing when you see one at ground level. And depending on the season, these can form huge flocks in flooded grasslands. So really a sight to behold. And then from the big to the small, teeming with passerines as well. Greenback becard is a small passerine species that is strongly associated with riverine forests. And then if you're really lucky, you might stumble across some exciting birds of prey, such as the Chaco eagle, which is one that eludes me still. It's one of a couple of species of crested eagle that you find in the country. If you've seen one of these, you've done very well. Another high species count, you're looking at more or less 350 species that occur in this ecoregion. And in terms of the dry Chaco, I mean, it's a similar group of species, but you'll find some that are less associated with wetland habitats. So the red-legged Seriema is part of a South American endemic family, one of 2 species, both of which occur in the dry Chaco. And then down here as well, you have the lark-like brush runner even, which isn't a lark, it's a species of ovenbird or funarid. So related to the hornero and the wood creepers and others. And a rogue non-bird that I've thrown in because I want to point out, a bit like I did with Ibera, that the Chaco is an excellent place, probably the best place in the country to view large mammals. So the name Chaco itself is derived from the Quechua indigenous language, which roughly translates to hunting land. And this gives way to the fact that there is a rich variety of large of megafauna that are found in the Chaco. So we're looking at some of the same species as Ibera, the jaguars, pumas, giant anteaters, tapirs, peccaries, skunks, armadillos, smaller species of cats, members of the weasel family. The Chaco's got it all. So if you get bored of the birds, there's plenty to keep you occupied here. It's worth mentioning as well that the Chaco, the eco-region, is not limited to Argentina. It also extends northwards through Paraguay and into southern Brazil and Bolivia, where it borders the Pantanal wetlands. So you get the movement of a lot of the same species that occur in the Pantanal will also occur in the Chaco, and they occur in good numbers too. So again, 350 species more or less. And we more or less covered the northeast. Now, I know we've got 3 more to go, but we have already, I believe, covered I've covered about half of all the ecoregions in the country. So now we're going to shift from the low-lying east to the northwest, where you will encounter an altogether different selection of birds and wildlife in general. So here are the ecoregions of the northwest, and we're now going to have a look at those one by one. Now, obviously, the northwest is defined by the Andes, the Andes mountain range, which is a mountain range I'm sure everybody knows. It extends the length of South America, and indeed the Cordillera in general forms the backbone of the whole American continent. So the Andes, as I mentioned, I'm going to show on the previous map here. So the high Andean ecoregion is this green area in northern Argentina, but the Andes themselves stretch all the way from the north in Venezuela down to the very base of Tierra del Fuego here, the very foot of the South American continent. And well, apart from being a biodiverse region, obviously you're going to get some fantastic scenery being in the middle of a mountain range. And the great thing is that the roads are of good quality, generally speaking. The highways are very well maintained. So it is possible to move around this northwestern area fairly easily. So the high Andes, as I pointed out, this green area down here in the west. And the high Andes, this is also where you find the tallest peaks in South America, including that of Mount Aconcagua, which is found, if you can see my mouse, down here in the province of Mendoza, and it stands about, I think, just under 7,000 meters tall. 6,962, I think, more or less. Anyway, so fantastic scenery. As I've already said, you get a few nice national parks up here, and a lot of national parks that incorporate different ecoregions as well. Now, as Horacio mentioned in the previous hour, the Andean condor is of high significance in the whole of South America, and Western Argentina in general represents one of the best places to see it on the continent. Not a common bird by any stretch, but if you spend some time in high Andean habitats, you're bound to see one at some point. Other species associated with the Andes, the torrent duck, which is strictly found along Andean mountain streams, as is also the rufous-throated dipper, which is a small passerine, part of a family that occurs not all over the world, but in different parts of the world. And each species emits the same behavior. They are all perfectly willing to dive into fast-flowing water where they're able to hold their breath and forage for insects. And they, like the great dusky swifts that we looked at the very beginning, are also capable of flying through waterfalls, where they often nest beside the shelter of the falling water. In terms of species diversity, well, a little bit less in the high Andes than you'll find further east, but do take into account that a lot of these species that occur here will not be found in the east of the country. So in any of the ecoregions that we previously looked at, you will not find any of these three, for example. And that's the same for a lot of the birds. Moving on and moving up really to the puna, which is known as the altiplano in other countries in South America. And the puna is defined by being really high up, basically. It's a high elevation ecoregion, high altitude ecoregion. It averages between 3 to 4,000 meters above sea level. So the air is thin, but the birding is good. The birding is surprisingly good, and you get some really nice species, again, as with the high Andes, that don't occur anywhere else. So we're looking now at this blue area here that is that mingles, I guess, with the high Andes. That moves through what do you got here? The provinces of Jujuy, Salta, Tucumán, down into Catamarca and La Rioja. And another defining feature of the puna are salt lakes, such as the Salinas Grandes. They're not all in Bolivia. In Argentina, we have some as well. And then the excellent birding location that is the Laguna de los Pozuelos lake that's found, I think, close to 4,000 meters above sea level, where you can see species such as the following. So James's flamingo, one of 3 species that occur in these high altitude wetlands. You've got the Andean avocet as well. And then one of the most targeted species in Argentina from a monotypic genus, the diademed sandpiper plover, or Phaeonis micheli. Yeah, this is a real star species of the Andes. If you've seen one of these, you've done very well, because they don't show themselves to everyone. But this is just, again, just an indication that the high Andes and the puna ecoregions really do harbor some of the most exciting species in the country, where you can't see them anywhere else. So don't be fooled by the low species total, because some of the species you see here are really quite remarkable and definitely worth a visit. As we move slightly downhill, we encounter cloud forest habitats, so namely the chungas. So the chungas aren't limited just to Argentina. These also extend northwards into Bolivia and all the way up into Peru. And obviously cloud forests occur further north as well. So Colombia and Venezuela, Ecuador will have its own types of cloud forest habitats. The chungas then, we're moving down downhill from the high Andes. So it's this light green area here, bordering the Andes and the Chaco. And the chungas, a bit like the Atlantic forest in the east, is one of the most biodiverse areas of the country. It's very green, it's often very wet, but don't let that put you off. If it wasn't so wet, then you wouldn't get such a nice diversity of species. And you get some really interesting families. So the rusty flower piercer, the chunga screech owl, which until recently I think was called the Hoyt screech owl. But it may still be called the Hoyt screech owl. You'll have to refer to your whichever checklist you follow, which is a chungas endemic, by the way. And then the fulvous-headed brush finch as well is a really nice chungas specialist. We're looking at 350 species. It's a species tally that rivals that of the Atlantic forest. And I think between the two, you are looking at the most biodiverse areas of the country. So if you can only spend time in one area and all you're focused about is seeing as many birds as possible, it really has to be a choice between the two, either the Atlantic forest in Misiones or the chungas of the northwest. Yeah, to which point we're now going to move south. Just worth mentioning quickly that up here in the northwest, my circle is smaller than that in the northeast, because I mean, if you are able to see the detail in the different colors up here in the northwest, you can see there's a lot of different colors in a very small area. So really within just a couple of 100 kilometers, you could traverse 5 different ecoregions. So imagine what kind of species list you could end up with by doing that. You can visit the high Andes, the Puna and the Chungas all in one day, and potentially also get down to visiting one of these ecoregions that I've got here marked in the center of Argentina. And we're going to start looking at it straight away. And that's the Monte, which isn't one of the most fashionable ecoregions of the country, neither the high Monte nor the low Monte, but they're definitely worth mentioning and of particular significance to birders. So first, you're going to show where the Monte is. Here we have the high Monte. There's this pale area here between the Andes and the Chaco. And then this yellow area further down, this large area, is the low Monte. And this is where we're transitioning between subtropical Argentina and the temperate region of Patagonia. The Monte is defined by its dryness. It's an arid area, receives some of the lowest annual rainfalls of anywhere in Argentina, some years less than 100 millimeters annually. But it's a habitat, as I said, important for birders, because although Argentina has a fairly low level of endemism, it only has 16 purely endemic species and 5 additional breeding endemics. Half of those endemic species are actually found in the Monte, and almost strictly in the Monte ecoregion. And these, as you're going to be able to tell from the photos, are what we call in England the LBJs, the little brown jobbies. Basically, these are among the hardest birds to identify, and these are some that are going to give you headaches for days. So I urge you to have your camera at the ready when you visit the Monte, because you're probably going to need to be reviewing some of those photos for some time afterwards in order to be able to get the correct identification. That being said, once you have got the correct ID, I mean, there are loads of these little brown birds that you could potentially be looking at. So the sandy gachito or galito here on the left-hand side is a member of the, or is closely related to the tapaculos and the wetwets of the Andes. And this is a Monte endemic. Here as well, we have the white-throated cachalote on the right. It's part of a South American endemic family of only 2 species, but this being the only one that is purely endemic to Argentina. And if you want the typical model of LBJ, then you've got the canisteros. In this case, Steinbach's canistero, which is endemic to central Argentina. All canisteros are small, they're all brown, they all make pretty much the same sound, and they're all devilishly difficult to identify. But once you do identify them, there's plenty of them. I think there are in excess of 10 species. So you've got your hands full with the canisteros. But once you get used to it, once you start learning their calls, it is good fun. And the Monte, we acknowledge that it's a large ecoregion that borders other diverse ecoregions such as the Andes and the Chaco. So 200 species is reasonable, that can be found within some of these national parks listed above. Moving on quickly, because I'm aware that I'm running out of time. We still have a few more to cover. So we've got the Espinal here. And this, as the name suggests, is spiniferous forest that is found in this gray band here. So it basically protects the province of Buenos Aires from the effects of the Andes. And the Espinal is predominantly forested. Yeah, so the forest types, they do attract a large number of species, and especially with its vicinity to some of the northern wetlands like the Esteros del Ibera, the Parana River. You get a really nice range of species, but here we're going to focus on 3 passerines. So the white-tipped plant cutter is a nice and fairly common one with a peculiar call. The yellow cardinal is a species of concern with regards to its conservation within Argentina. It's commonly appears as part of the illegal pet trade. So there's a lot of conservation work being done with the species. And then the white mojita as well tends to be among the favorites for visitors who visit central and northern Argentina. It's an ethereal New World flycatcher that really stands out against the green background. Going to point out as well up here where it says Laguna Mar Chiquita. So Mar Chiquita is, well, I think it's the, well, it is the largest lake in Argentina. It's the 5th largest non-draining lake in the world. And it is saline. So it attracts a lot of wetland species, but those that you wouldn't find in, for example, the subtropical wetlands further north. So it's an important site for Chilean flamingo, for Wilson's phalarope, baird, sandpiper, and a whole load of other migrants. And it's in the process of being turned into a national park, which will be called the Ancenusa National Park. So keep an eye out for that one, because tourism infrastructure is going to go through the roof when a national park is inaugurated there. 250 species, give or take, in the Espinal. Really nice diversity. And behind the Espinal, and a bit close to home in my case, is the Pampa. And the Pampa is strongly synonymous with the province of Buenos Aires. So it's all this area here, creeps into Entre Rios from Córdoba and La Pampa, but it's predominantly the whole of the province of Buenos Aires. And the Pampa is defined by grassland, flat, never-ending expanses of grassland, with the odd tussocks of hardy vegetation, but with some really nice birding. And because it's low-lying grassland, it's very low elevation, it is prone to flooding. And with that, you get a nice array of species that can occur in, well, several habitats. So New World blackbirds are common, such as the scarlet-headed blackbird here. Southern screamer is a very popular species for visitors and very common in the Pampas. And the upland sandpiper is one of a variety of shorebirds or waders that migrate here for the austral summer and actually stay in the grasslands and are not associated with the coast or with wetland habitats at all. Again, more or less 250 species to get stuck into while you're here. And without further ado, we're going to move south and cover the last 2 ecoregions in the area of Patagonia. So yeah, there are 4 within the circle, but we've already covered 2. So now we're going to look firstly at the Patagonian steppe. If you've taken a trip with Horacio, you can recognize the car. Here he's parked next to a big flock of Chilean flamingo and a single white-winged coot here, I think. We've got horses, we've got sheep. And this little wetlands here really represents an oasis and what is an otherwise quite barren landscape. If you live in Patagonia, if you drive through Patagonia, you'll know that a lot of it isn't so easy on the eye. It's all a bit flat. It can get a bit boring, but you also get some very nice species. And the oases such as these are real highlights because they attract all the local wetland species in the area. So the Patagonian steppe covers this enormous expanse of land down south. Here we've got some nice lesser rhea or Darwin's rhea that occur in the steppe. And you get some nice, some nice birds of prey such as the Cinereus harrier. Long-tailed meadowlark is a New World blackbird that's very common in the grasslands. And carbonated Sierra finch is an endemic species to Argentina that is a target bird if you visit this peninsula just here. I hope you can see on my mouse, just in the, it looks like it forms part of the low Monte, but actually it is Patagonian steppe habitat. And this is also a great place to do a spot of whale watching if you're interested. Southern right whales are around for half the year, so you can combine the 2. That's the carbonated Sierra finch right there. Species totals are low, relatively low considering the size of the ecoregion. But ultimately, it's an easy ecoregion to combine with the Patagonian forest. And this is where we see some of the most exciting species in Argentina. The forest itself is ancient, similar to the to the ancient woodland found in the found on the South Island of New Zealand. This is of the trees are of the Nothofagus genus predominantly, that southern beech. And this is, like I said, it's ancient woodland, and it's very well protected because of its close proximity to the mountains. It means it's very hard to chop down, and it means that the habitat itself has survived really rather well. So it occurs here in central Argentina and follows the Andes all the way south to the very tip of Tierra del Fuego. Lots of national parks because it's a very popular spot for adventure, tourism as well. You've got the glaciers, you've got peaks, you've got glacial lakes. It's a very aesthetic zone. It's very attractive on the eye. And you get some cracking species like the Magallanes woodpecker, made famous in a David Attenborough documentary, of course. You've got tapaculos and wetwets, like this black-throated wetwet, which is an Andean speciality. And austral parakeets. There's over 30 species of parakeet or macaw in Argentina. This is the most southerly of them all, the austral, commonly seen in Araucaria forest or monkey puzzle forest, it's known in English. Only 150 species, okay, but I mean, these are 3 real target birds that you might not see in other ecoregions. So the Patagonian forest, highly recommended. And it's forest birding where your camera isn't going to steam up as well, because there's very little humidity down there in Patagonia. So highly recommended. Time-wise, yeah, going to wrap up here. So just, these aren't ecoregions, but they're definitely worth mentioning. We've got the Atlantic. Obviously, we've got 4,000 kilometers of coastline in Argentina. And so you get not only excellent coastal wetland habitats, but you also have, you've got all the migratory shorebirds, and we offer some nice pelagic trips where you can see albatrosses, shearwaters, storm petrels, skuas, among others, and not to mention the penguins. There are mainland penguins, including the Magallanes penguin, and then also on the offshore islands, you'll get some nice breeding species there, such as the king and the gentoo. And finally, I know Horacio is getting stressed here. You will undoubtedly end up in the city of Buenos Aires at some point. And it is worth mentioning that it is a surprisingly good urban birding destination. Over 300 species have been recorded in the Costanera Sur Ecological Reserve, which is found right in the heart of the city. So my recommendation is that when you do inevitably come to Argentina on the back of this presentation, that you firstly arrive in Buenos Aires. You make sure you have access to this book or any of the various apps that you can download on your smartphone, and you pay a little visit to this reserve to get used to some of not only the common urban species, but also some of the wetland, forest and grassland species that you can find in the rest of the country. So it's thanks from me, or muchas gracias to those to the Spanish speakers among you. I finished with the Rufous hornero, the national bird of Argentina, and it has been for over 100 years. And it and myself will be here to greet you when you do inevitably make your way over here. Thank you, Horacio. You can stop worrying. I've finished.
Any questions? Thank you very much, Alex.
I can look at the comments on the Facebook page if you like, and if there are any questions, I can go and answer those just straight away on the Facebook page to save you some time.
Ok, si alguien quiere preguntar, la charla quedará puesta en el Facebook, así que las preguntas que quieran incluso hacer posteriormente, Alex va a quedar atento los próximos días para seguir contestando, y bueno, es un canal que ya queda abierto. Así que bueno, muchas gracias Alex, muchas gracias a todos.